From Anchored in Faith Gospel Church in Oxford, Iowa, this is Anchored in Faith.
We've been talking about Elijah and Jezebel, and we're going to wrap them up and move into another area, but we're going to go to 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 18, because this is a good place to leave Elijah and go into another study. Because Elijah, of course, you know, he's in the cave, he's crying out to God, he's had the big victory. Jezebel sends him a threat. She could have sent troops. She could have sent her army to get him. But she sent a threat. I'm going to get you. And for some reason, he just was terrified. So he ran to the cave. He's crying out to God. He's saying, kill me. Take me. You know, I'm no better than my fathers. You know, I'm not your man. Ever felt like that? Ever felt like you aren't God's man anymore, aren't God's woman anymore? You know, well, I have. I'm sure you have too. Nothing's going like it's supposed to. You have more opposition than you used to. People are meaner to you. People are less interested in God. You know, your message isn't getting through. You know, if I'm going to really lay it on you here, you know, if you go to the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel told God to go to Israel and warn them about going into captivity. And he says, I'm going to tell you before you go, they're not going to hear you. Now, how's that for a message? Because I want them to know when they're in judgment that there is a man of God among them. And that's where we're at. A lot of these people that we're dealing with, you know, I don't know what's going to happen to them, but they'll never be able to say that there wasn't a man of God or a woman of God among them, Ray. Like you, me, Tana, everybody. You're out there and you're getting beat up. Someday, well, everybody's going to stand before God. These people think they're going to die and nothing's going to happen. You know, they're going to be standing before God. And God's going to say, well, you know what? Tana Buchanan told you about Jesus. Sister Linda told you about Jesus. You know, Doug Bell or Pastor Ray told you about Jesus. So you're without excuse. And that's what they told Ezekiel. You know, I'm going to tell you right now, they're not even going to hear you. Now, you talk about discouragement. Would you still go? If God spoke to you audibly and said that, to go and preach somewhere and they're not even going to hear you. Well, be a little discouraging to me, but he did it. And he was faithful to God. He did it. So let's look at Elijah, verse 18. He says God's talking to him. He's appeared to him in the whirlwind and the storm and everything. And he says, yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth which has not kissed him. So he's saying that I have my people hidden that have been faithful to me. 7,000 that you don't even know about. So there's people that we don't even know about that we'll know about. Okay, so Elijah is being told that you're not the only one, that there's a remnant. And this is what we're going to move into. We're going to move out of Elijah and Jezebel, because you know how the story ends. Jezebel gets killed. Ahab gets killed in battle. Jezebel ends up getting eaten by the dogs outside the gate. And Elijah goes to heaven. So that's a happy ending. He goes up and doesn't even die. He's translated, just like Elisha. They both go to heaven. They don't even see death. So, you know, that's speaking to us of what's going to happen to us someday. We're going to be taken, if Jesus tarries. I don't know, some of us will see death. Some of us won't. Some of us will go in the rapture. And that's a type, that's a foreshadowing of the rapture of the church. Is Elijah going up and Elisha going up? And we're going to look at Enoch. He was too. Now, when you read the Old Testament, you got to remember that the Old Testament is looking forward to Jesus. Everything in the Old Testament points to Jesus. The law, the prophets, everything that you see, you scratch your head and say, well, what does that mean? It's all pointing to Jesus, and it's being fulfilled. So we're going to go and look at this idea of the faithful remnant. We'll go back to the Garden of Eden. We'll go back to Genesis. And we'll start Cain and Abel. If you go to Genesis 4, verses 1 to 10. Right here in the garden, God starts separating out the faithful from the unfaithful. Now, chapter 4 begins, says, Adam knew his wife. She conceived and bare Cain and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the soil. Now remember, if you go back to Genesis 3, verse 21, Adam and Eve have sinned. They've broken God's law. He's kicked them out of the garden. And verse 21 says, and unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. Now, what does that mean? Well, you have to remember again that until the time of Moses, there was no written scripture. Right. Moses was the one who went up on the mountain, got the revelation, and wrote it down. Before that, God is dealing with man directly. He's appearing to them. He's talking in an audible voice. He's manifesting himself in various ways, but there's no Bible to read. So he showed them by putting the skins on. He had to kill the animals. The animals were slain. The skins were put on them to cover them. So they've been shown that this is a requirement to cover their sin, is the blood sacrifice. And so I'm sure that they taught this to their children, Cain and Abel. That blood, the shedding of blood, what's the Bible say? Hebrews says, without the shedding of blood, there's no remission. That's why Muslims aren't saved. Muhammad didn't die for nobody. He didn't shed his blood. He sheds everybody else's blood. And his followers shed everybody else's blood. But Muhammad didn't shed his blood for anybody. There's no basis for them to be forgiven because there's no blood sacrifice in Islam. It's all, you surrender and you grow a beard and put on your whatever you put on, you start throwing bombs. That's pretty much it right now. That's Islam. But he didn't die for anybody. Jesus did. And so he's showing them that the blood sacrifice is required. So, you know the story. Cain and Abel bring their sacrifice. And Abel brings a lamb. He brings, a lamb slain, presents it to God. He's accepted. Cain brings the fruit of the ground. There's no blood. And he's telling them, use my glasses here. He said, and unto Cain and his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said to Cain, why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? In other words, he's saying, you know what's required. Why are you upset? Your brother was accepted. Go back, make a sacrifice. You'll be accepted too. He says, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? and if thou doest not well, sin lies at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And when it says sin lies at the door, that word is also the same word for sin offering. So sin and sin offering, he's saying your offering is there for your sin if you'll just go and do what your brother did. Well, you know the story. He didn't. He got mad. He killed his brother. Again, he was cursed. So who's faithful here? Abel. First one of God's faithful remnant. And of course, you know the story. Cain is cursed. He said, my curse is too much for me. And he's a wanderer. So God's already separating. He's already reserving people who are going to be faithful to him. Now, Abel was faithful. Who's the next? Well, the next one is Enoch, and that's in verse 5, Genesis 5:21. And of course, it goes through all the generations of Adam. And in verse 21, it says, Enoch, who is the son of Jared, lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now, when it says God took him, it means the word is translated him.
Yeah. Right.
Gone. Just like we're going to be. There's a lot of teachers teaching no rapture. A lot of people are coming out now and saying there's no rapture. Yeah, I don't know what they're teaching in place of it, but, you know, they're just teaching that, I don't know, Jesus is going to return and we're going to be here, and I don't know. I guess a lot of them teach the tribulation's already happened. You know, Jerusalem fell, the Romans destroyed the temple, the Jews were scattered. That was the tribulation. But it's not. There's none of that. The tribulation, to me, is the supernatural part. You know, we're going to go through persecution, hard times, all that. But the supernatural part is what we're going to escape. Because we couldn't stand. I mean, how would we stand? You know, when there's no water and when the trees are burned up and, you know, there's hailstones coming down and that type of thing. We're gone by then. But anyway, there's a lot of teachers teaching that, you know, that the rapture is some extra doctrine or something. But it's right here. Enoch was translated. Elisha. When Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration, who came back and appeared? Elijah. Elijah and Moses appeared to him because Elijah hadn't died. And so he was there. So, again, this is looking forward to what's going to happen to the church. You walk with God, you will be taken. With the church. Now, you got to walk with God. You got to be faithful. And we've talked before. What does faithful mean? Well, being faithful is a lot of things. I mean, you can come to church. That's an indicator. People can go to church and not be saved. You can pray, worship, read your Bible. Those are indicators. People can pray and not be saved. People can give their tithe and not be saved. People can do all kinds of things. But your faithfulness is all together. All those things together. It's your walk. It's your everyday actions. You know, those are indicators. You know, a person that's going to give tithes and offerings, that's an indicator. Because people don't want to give their money. Now, if you don't think that's true, I'll just tell you, I'll just stop here. I used to be the bookkeeper when I was in the church. I was the bookkeeper for years. And I was the one that counted the money, made the deposits, paid the bills, wrote a check for the pastor. I'm telling you, most people in the Pentecostal, charismatic, full gospel churches, whatever you want to talk it, do not give tithes and offerings. They don't. So I just tell you that they don't, because I know. I've counted the money. I've tried to make the bills, pay the preacher, all that. If we didn't have a big church, it was small like this one, Tana knows, he was there. And if everybody had given their tithes, we'd have been fine. We'd have made it, everybody would have been, but believe me, they don't. And when you talk about money, that's when people get ugly. What did Jesus say? Jesus says, where your money is, that's where your heart is. And people, they get things backwards. I'll just say this is probably shouldn't say this one, but at Christmas time in that church, they would take an offering every year. They called it Christ's birthday offering. It was for missions. It was a little, it was just an extra offering, and people, you wouldn't get $10. And yet I knew, because I was doing it, but people would go out and go and hawk for Christmas. They'd use their credit card. They'd spend hundreds of dollars for Christmas and wouldn't give $5 for missions. So, that's just how it is. Now, you spent money on Christmas too, but we were tithing. And so that's people can give their money. When you talk about money, that's when they get nasty. That's one place they get nasty. There's other places, but that's one. So, but your giving is an indicator. If you've got somebody who'll give 10%, they might be saved. Depends on what else they're doing, but they could be. It's an indicator. So anyway, we're going to move on, but this idea of no rapture is really getting to be, prevalent. And so people are not living like Jesus is going to return. What's the parable of the 10 virgins about? Go back and read that. Matthew 10. Going to the wedding. The bridegroom is coming. Who's the bridegroom? Jesus. See, in the Middle East, in our culture, a wedding is about the bride. And that's true. The bride is the center. If you go to the Middle East, the wedding is about the groom. That's just the way it is. That's just the way that their culture is. And so the bridegroom coming to the wedding is the picture. And here's all of the women that are involved in the wedding, and they're supposed to be looking for his appearing. And what do? 5 are not, 5 are. 5 have their lamps ready, burning, trimmed, and 5 will let them go out. Well, that's a picture of the church. We've got people whose lamps have gone out. Churches whose lamps have gone out. What did Jesus say in Revelation? He told the church, one of them, he said, I'm taking your lampstand away because you've not been faithful. So some of these churches, their lamp is gone. Now there's people in there that love God. And there's people in there that, will probably be with Jesus. But as a group, as an organization, their lamp's gone. They've compromised to the point where, boom, Jesus has passed them by. That's very, people say, well, once saved, always saved. But all you have to do is look at Judas. And I always use Judas for an example. Jesus sent them out 2 by 2. Remember? He sent them out and they came back and they said, why, even the devils are, are afraid of us, and we've healed the sick and preached the gospel. Judas was in that group. It doesn't say he was not sent. He was sent with everybody else. He did everything the others did. He healed the sick, cast out devils, preached the gospel, and what happened? You think Judas is going to be in heaven? I don't think so. So what you are today may not be where you're at when Jesus comes. That's a warning to everybody, all of us. Everybody can be deceived. The Bible says even the elect can be deceived if you're not careful. But Enoch is a type of the church. He walked with God and he was taken. Now, if you look at the book of Jude's only got one chapter, verse 14 and 15. Talks about Enoch. Enoch was persecuted for his message. See, Enoch tried to point people to God. If you read in his time, people were starting to fall away from God. Adam and Eve's descendants were getting more and more away from God, and eventually, of course, the flood will come. But Jude 14 and 15 says, "And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." So, in Enoch's time, he was already pointing to people to the coming of the Lord. Yes. He told them that God was going to come and judge the earth. And they didn't believe him. They persecuted him. They laughed at him. They turned away. They didn't believe it. And so, again, God sent the flood in his day, but Enoch is already pointing down the road to the coming of Christ. See, a lot of the Old Testament saints had a revelation of Jesus. Moses did. He was on the mountain. Remember, he said, "Show me your glory." And God showed him, hit him in the rock, and passed by. All he saw was his back. But that was Jesus he saw. He saw Jesus. He saw the pre-incarnate Christ is who he saw. Isaiah had a vision of Jesus high and lifted up. He was a priest. And he said, show me. And God appeared to him, and he was on his face, saying, "I'm undone. I'm a man of unclean lips." And Isaiah was a faithful priest. Most of them were not faithful. He was faithful. And God revealed himself to him, and what did he say? Well, I'm on my face. That's where we need to be, is on our face more. I've been on my face before God, crying out. That's what we need to do. In the old days, and I didn't grow up in church. My wife did, but I didn't. But my mother-in-law used to tell me about services. The sinners would come up in front and cry out. And when they were done, they would leave their cigarettes and their liquor and stuff and go away, change. We don't see that. You don't see that. You tell me a church where you see that. Now, there might be, but I don't know. People don't cry out to God like they used to. And I'm pointing at them, and there's 3 pink fingers pointing at me, too. Because I don't cry out to God like I should. We're all wrapped up in our deal. Whatever our deal is, work, kids, marriage, money, whatever it is, we're wrapped up in it, and we're not crying out. So if you're going to be part of the faithful remnant, then you're going to be the ones that are going to just say, "All right, take it all, God. you can have it. You just got to be able to give it up, and it's hard. We don't want to give up nothing. But the times are getting, I mean, I hate to say it, but being a Christian's almost against the law in this country anymore. It is. You know, all these little decisions that get made by the government, some bureaucrat or some judge, you got to remember something. They have the force of law. In other words, they're enforceable by some policeman with a gun who can put the cuffs on you if they don't like what you're saying or doing. Now, that's just the way it is. And you didn't vote on none of it, and neither did I. It was somebody that you didn't elect, made some decision, and it's affecting your spiritual life. What you can say and not say, what you can do and not do, what you can teach your kids and not teach your kids. I mean, like I said, they'll put the cuffs on you and you'll be in the hooskow, looking out. And what happened to the First Amendment? What happened to our Constitution? You know, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law to prohibit free speech, free exercise of religion, or free assembly. Now, if Congress can't do it, nobody else can either. But they're doing it, and we're more and more being marginalized, pushed in the corner, you know, by this society that we all grew up in. Some of us, like me, defended it. Some of the people out there watching, they're veterans, you know, they defended it. And I don't mean nothing, you know. And so you have to remember, all these decisions that get made, they're enforceable. They can have somebody at your door, and we got you on a tape, you said this, you did that, come with me. And so it's not a pretty picture in our country. And so we're going to wrap up. We're going to keep on this because we're going to look at the faithful remnant, because God's always had a faithful remnant. He has one now. That's the good news. He's got one now. And, you know, we all may end up in the jail cell together, but, I mean, we're faithful. Because that puts us in with Paul, and that puts us in with Peter, and that puts us in with Jesus. They all went to jail. You know, I mean, like I said many times, according to our modern standards, Jesus was a failure, Paul, the apostles, because they got run out of town. They got beat. They got kicked out of the synagogue. They went to jail. They didn't have big ministry. They didn't have a big mailing list and TV show and all this stuff that we think is so necessary today to serve God. They didn't have none of that. And so they were failures by our standards, but we know they weren't. But, you know, if you look at it from the way we look at it, why, they didn't have anything going. They didn't make anybody feel good. That's the other one. Jesus didn't make too many people feel good. You know, he didn't hold their hand and say, oh, it's going to be okay. You just need to have a positive attitude. You know, it's okay. Just, you know, it was go and sin no more.
Full sermons are available anytime at www.anchoredinfaith.org. Contact us by calling 319-828-4815 or write us at Anchored in Faith, P.O. Box 204, Oxford, Iowa 52322, or email us at tv@anchoredinfaith.org. This has been a copyrighted presentation of Anchored in Faith Gospel Church, Oxford, Iowa.